Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The evening I proposed to Louise felt like the beginning of a perfect story. We stood under the soft glow of fairy lights strung along the old oak tree in her parents' backyard, a place she had always called her sanctuary. She gasped when I knelt on one knee, her hands flying to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, Elliot." "Of course, yes," she cried, her voice trembling with joy. Her parents, Vincent and Margaret, had been watching from the patio. They cheered, clapping with enthusiasm, and I thought, perhaps foolishly, that they were as happy as we were. For weeks afterward, Louise and I floated in the bliss of our engagement, making plans and dreaming of the future. But when the wedding preparations began in earnest, the reality of marrying into her family quickly became apparent. It started subtly. Louise and I had discussed a small wedding, something intimate with our closest friends and family. But during a casual dinner at her parents' house, Margaret casually asked, "Have you considered a larger venue? Something grander to match the occasion?" "We were thinking something smaller," I replied politely, glancing at Louise for backup. She hesitated before nodding. "Yes, we were looking at the Oakfield Hall." Margaret's face stiffened. "Oakfield Hall? Isn't that a bit understated?" "It's a lovely venue," Mom Louise said, trying to sound firm but faltering under her mother's gaze. Vincent chimed in, "Louise, this isn't just any event. This is your wedding. You'll want people to remember it, won't you? A bigger venue would make a stronger impression." I clenched my jaw, biting back the urge to respond. It wasn't worth starting an argument yet, but the seeds of tension had been planted. As the weeks went by, Vincent and Margaret's involvement became less of an offer to help and more of an outright takeover. Louise seemed caught in the middle, nodding along to their suggestions, even when they directly contradicted what we had agreed upon. One evening, I confronted her about it. "Louise, do you even want the wedding we're planning, or is this just for your parents?" She sighed, sinking onto the couch beside me. "It's not like that, Elliot. They mean well. They just have strong opinions." "Strong opinions? Louise, your dad just told me we need to invite 50 of his friends from work. People I've never met." "They're family friends," she muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Are they? Because it feels like this wedding is becoming less about us and more about them." Louise didn't respond, and her silence cut deeper than any argument could have. The final straw came during another dinner at her parents' house. Margaret presented a printed schedule of tasks, complete with deadlines and assignments. I skimmed through it, my irritation growing with each bullet point. "Vincent and I have taken the liberty of booking a caterer," she announced with a tight smile. "You'll love them. They're the best in town." "Margaret, we haven't even finalized the menu yet," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Oh, don't worry about that. We've already chosen the dishes. It's a fusion theme, very modern." I glanced at Louise, waiting for her to push back, but she just stared at her plate. The evening ended with Vincent pulling me aside as we were leaving. "Elliot, I know you're under a lot of pressure, but a word of advice. When you marry Louise, you marry this family. It's important to understand what that means." His words stayed with me long after we left, gnawing at the edges of my mind. For the first time, I wondered if I was making a mistake. The dinner started innocently enough. Louise and I had been invited over to her parents' house to discuss a few important details about the wedding. The smell of Margaret's roasted chicken wafted through the air, and Vincent was already pouring wine as we walked in. For a moment, it felt like a normal family evening. But I should have known better. We were halfway through the meal when Vincent cleared his throat, placing his fork down with deliberate precision. "Elliot, Louise," he began, glancing at Margaret, who nodded in silent agreement. "Margaret and I have been talking, and we feel there's something important that needs to be addressed before the wedding." I paused mid-bite, the tone of his voice raising the hairs on the back of my neck. "What's that?" Vincent leaned back, his expression carefully composed. "It's a matter of respect. You see, in our culture, it's customary for the groom to demonstrate his commitment and respect for the bride's family before the marriage." I frowned, exchanging a confused glance with Louise. "I'm not sure I follow." Margaret jumped in, her voice softer but no less insistent. What your father is trying to say, dear, is that it would mean a great deal to us if you helped pay off the remainder of our mortgage. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly. You're asking me to pay off your mortgage? Vincent's smile didn't falter. Not asking, Elliot. It's a tradition, a gesture of goodwill and respect for the family you're joining. It's what any honorable man would do. I sat back in my chair, my appetite evaporating. I've never heard of this tradition before. It's not about hearing it before, Margaret chimed in. It's about showing your gratitude. After all, we've raised Louise, provided her with a stable home, and supported her in becoming the woman you fell in love with. Don't you think that's worth acknowledging? Mom, Dad, this is, Louise began, but Vincent cut her off with a raised hand. It's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, Elliot, he said, his tone now edged with impatience. We're talking about $150,000. Surely a man in your position can manage that. I stared at him, incredulous. With all due respect, Vincent, that's a significant amount of money. And frankly, this feels less like a gesture and more like a demand. Vincent's jaw tightened. It's not a demand. It's a test of character. If you're serious about marrying Louise, you'll want to show that you're willing to support the family you're becoming a part of. Support the family? I'm marrying Louise, not buying into a business venture. I snapped before I could stop myself. Margaret gasped, and Louise's face turned pale. Elliot, let's not. She began, but Vincent's voice thundered over hers. Watch your tone, young man. You're speaking to your future father-in-law. I pushed my chair back, the screech of wood against tile cutting through the tension. If this is some kind of ultimatum, then let me be clear. I will not be paying off your mortgage. My respect for Louise and our future together doesn't come with a price tag. Margaret clutched her pearls dramatically, while Vincent's face darkened. Louise reached for my arm, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot, can we talk about this privately? I looked down at her, disappointment flickering in my chest. What's there to talk about, Louise? You can't seriously think this is reasonable. Her hesitation was all the answer I needed. As we left that night, the unspoken tension hung heavy between us. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, suffocating any remaining hope that this wedding could proceed without further conflict. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my relationship. I was fighting against an entire family. The days following that tense dinner were quiet, almost too quiet. Louise had been uncharacteristically reserved, dodging my attempts to discuss her parents' outrageous demand. I tried to tell myself she was just processing everything, but a gnawing feeling in my gut told me otherwise. That Saturday morning, I found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face a careful mask of calm. Louise, we need to talk, I said, standing in front of her. She looked up, her expression already defensive. About what? You know what? Your parents' so-called tradition. I need to know where you stand on this. She sighed, setting her phone down. Elliot, it's not that simple. They're my family. You know how important their approval is to me. And what about me? What about us? I countered, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you think it's fair for them to ask this of me? Or for you to even entertain the idea? She hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. I'm not saying it's fair, but maybe there's a middle ground. We could look into a loan or... A loan. I interrupted, my voice sharp with disbelief. You want me to go into debt for their mortgage? This isn't compromise, Louise. This is you taking their side. She stood, crossing her arms. I'm not taking sides, Elliot. I'm trying to find a solution that keeps everyone happy. Well, newsflash. I'm not happy, I snapped. And honestly, I'm starting to wonder if you're more worried about their approval than building a future with me. Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might fight back. But then, she said the words that cut me deeper than any argument ever could. Maybe my dad's right. If you're not willing to invest in my family, what does that say about your commitment to me? I froze, her words echoing in my mind like a warning bell. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "I am," she said, her voice trembling. "They're my parents, Elliot. They've always been there for me. If you can't understand that..." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stop. Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to prove my love by paying off a debt that has nothing to do with us. That's not love, Louise. That's extortion." She flinched but didn't back down. "I think you need to leave," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Leave?" I repeated, stunned. "Yeah, maybe some space will help us figure out what's really important here," she replied, her voice barely audible. I didn't argue. I grabbed my coat, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. As I closed the door behind me, one thought consumed me. If Louise couldn't stand up for us now, how could I trust her to stand by me in the future? The days following my decision to end the engagement were anything but peaceful. Vincent and Margaret, Louise's parents, refused to accept my stance. Their anger escalated into an onslaught of harassment, and Louise, who should have been my partner in this ordeal, was nowhere to be found. It began with incessant phone calls. My phone buzzed at all hours, with Margaret leaving voicemails laced with guilt-tripping rhetoric. "You've embarrassed us," one message hissed. "You've made a mockery of our family." Vincent's messages were colder, tinged with veiled threats. One evening, I sat with my friend Adam in my apartment. I'd finally blocked Vincent and Margaret's numbers, but I underestimated their persistence. "You think they'll give up?" Adam asked, sipping his coffee. I sighed, scrolling through my emails. "They're relentless. Look at this one." I turned my laptop toward him, revealing an email from Vincent. Its subject line read, "A final warning." Adam's eyebrows shot up. Final warning? These people are unhinged. The email was nothing short of a tirade. Vincent threatened to spread rumors about my character and accuse me of financial deceit. "If you don't reimburse us for the wedding expenses," it read, "we'll ensure your reputation is ruined." But it didn't stop there. The next day, Margaret showed up at my workplace demanding to see me. My boss intercepted her, but not before she loudly accused me of destroying Louise's life. My phone rang. This time, it was my boss. "Elliot, we need to talk," he said curtly. "There have been some complaints about your personal life affecting the company's reputation. I suggest you get this under control." That was the breaking point. I contacted a lawyer who advised me to document every instance of harassment. Adam helped me compile voicemails, emails, and witness accounts. Together, we built an airtight case. Then came the final straw. A letter slid under my door. It was written in Vincent's unmistakable hand and detailed their intention to sue me for emotional damages if I didn't comply with their demands. That's when I knew it was time to act. I filed a restraining order against Vincent and Margaret. When the paperwork was served, their reaction was explosive. Margaret called, screaming about how I'd destroy their family. Vincent's response was more calculated. He began posting defamatory comments about me online. Through it all, Louise remained silent. It was clear she had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. Adam's words echoed in my mind as I signed the final restraining order papers. Sometimes cutting people out isn't just an option, it's a necessity. Months after the restraining orders were filed, life began to settle. Vincent and Margaret's harassment had ceased, though traces of their smear campaign lingered online. With the support of Adam and my lawyer, I managed to rebuild my sense of stability. The next morning, my lawyer called with unexpected news. "Elliot, I've found something you'll want to see," she said. "Vincent's company has been under investigation for tax fraud. There's a whistleblower who claims he's been laundering money for years." The revelation hit me like a freight train. Suddenly, their desperation for me to pay off their mortgage made sense. They weren't just trying to control me, they needed to cover up their own crimes. I sent the evidence to the authorities and waited, tension coiled in my chest. The response came swiftly. 2 weeks later, Vincent was arrested. His name splashed across every local news outlet. Louise called me that evening, her voice shaky. "I didn't know, Elliot," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." I let her words hang in the air before replying, "You knew enough. You chose their side every time." For the first time, she didn't argue. As I moved on, an unexpected opportunity arose. A local journalist investigating the misuse of cultural traditions for financial gain reached out to me after hearing about my ordeal. Reluctantly, I agreed to an anonymous interview. The article went viral, sparking a broader conversation about manipulation and entitlement in relationships. Though I never named Vincent, Margaret, or Louise, their behavior became a cautionary tale for others. Months later, Adam and I sat in a cafe, reflecting on everything that had transpired. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd given in?" he asked. I shook my head. No, they wanted control, not compromise. Walking away was the best decision I ever made. As we left the cafe, I glanced at the changing leaves and felt a profound sense of freedom.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.